welcome to this review of Limbus Company's Chapter 1, The Outsider. Chapter 1 is heavily inspired by the Metamorphosis, not that one, the one by Franz Kafka, a Czech novelist known for his surrealistic works. I'll start with a summary of the chapter and end with how the two stories are even related to one another. Before I begin though, I want you to look out for some important parallels between the two stories. Themes of dehumanization, free will, and a failure to understand or communicate. Chapter 1 begins with violence and discord. The sinners above Mephistopheles murder each other over small arguments. Still, dazed upon accepting our newfound powers of LCB manager, we are helpless to do anything but watch. Afterwards, Virgilius tells us to turn back the clock. When doing so, a great ornate door appears before us. We learn that the cost of turning the clock is an immeasurable amount of pain. The door then opens to reveal the clawing dead. "Art thou prepared to share the pain?" a voice asks. Bracing against the pain, we turn the clock back and revive our sinners. Later on, we head into the back streets to fuel up and meet our new guest. A lady with an eye patch named Yuri reveals herself to us. She is a former employee of Lobotomy Corporation and will be our guide as we head into the depths of the L-Corp ruins. On the way to the ruins, we learn that our bus driver, Karen, does not know what a map is. Karen is apparently a feels-based navigator, which ultimately agitates both Yuri and Ishmael. They head to the front, and chaos ensues. And during that chaos, Gregor looks out listlessly at the dregs roaming the streets. He makes a note of nest conscription, disdain barely hidden in his voice. The back streets of this district house many people with bug-like prosthetics, similar to the one Gregor has as his arm. Gregor is reminded of G-Corp, the former corporation that grafted the augmentations onto him, and the many dregs we see roaming the streets. Soldiers, conscripts with no home, nowhere to belong to after the war chewed them up and spat them back out into the world. When confronting the vagrants blocking our bus, they seem to recognize Gregor from somewhere, maybe a poster or a flyer. After dispatching the multitude of homeless veterans, we make our way inside a former L-Corp branch. The inside of this branch is thick, with a rancid smell and infested with bugs. A host of veterans live within the ruins. When met, they offer to let us pass through peacefully until one of them recognizes Gregor. We learn that Gregor was famous in the military, but now these veterans call him traitor. They despise him for being able to live like a normal person, having never experienced the decrepit lifestyle they were forced into. These dwellers rescind their offer of peace after seeing Gregor, and we are forced to eliminate them. As we press deeper into the ruins, we learn more about L-Corp and the world. We are met with a depressed but distinguished veteran. He introduces himself as the head manager of Gregor's former team in G-Corp. He claims that Gregor deserted them to escape the war, but for him and his allies, the war has been ongoing, just in a different form. Gregor relates that life hasn't been easy for him either after the war. He struggled to make rent, to make money, to even live. After defeating the veteran, in his dying breath, the head manager remarks, "In the end, we're nothing but disgusting pests." We press forward until we get close enough to the golden bow that it begins to resonate with Gregor, exposing us all to the fathoms of his ego. The scenery shifts. There is an overcast sky. Cries and screams twist and ring out at a distance, and in that sky, gunfire and artillery create a cacophony. Gregor's voice cracks with fear and disbelief. Why? Why here again? The battlefield is filled with the battling bodies of bug people and soldiers. This is Gregor's hell. A young blonde soldier salutes Gregor with a smile, introducing himself as Thomas. Gregor realizes now that we are experiencing his memories. Suddenly, Gregor's words echo out from nothingness. "I think I once had an unsettling nightmare. Maybe I'm still in one, even now. In this dream, there are only two colors in the room where I stand. The blue, covering every wall, and a dangling dot of red. I know how to get out of here too. All I had to do was stretch out my arm and cut the hanging apple. The people in blue coats seemed to think I failed to understand that. Unfortunately for them, that wasn't the part I struggled to understand. When I finally gave up thinking about it, and the sliced apple fell to the floor, the door was opened. In either case, what I do remember is my desire to break free from the nightmare, a nightmare I escaped through renunciation and resignation. One day, as I awoke from my unsettling dreams, I had found myself transformed into some hideous pest. I thought I woke up from the dream, but I was still right in the middle of that nightmare. We return to that battlefield, though it is more distorted now. The soldiers are more mutated, and Toma regales more of Gregor's feats that should set him apart from the rest. But after the war was over, Gregor was reduced to nothing. The people around him spat at the name G-Corp, and he could hardly control his own arm. Then, in the third iteration of the battlefield, large woman-like hands emerged from the crimson skies, crushing everything in its trajectory to pulp. Gregor remarks that his own free will never played much of a role in his life as he stares up at the falling hands. After initially fleeing, eventually Gregor tells us that we should just accept it, our fate, as that is what he has always done. Trusting Gregor, we submit to being crushed by Herman's hands. But instead of death, they envelop us, lift us out of the battlefield and back into the L-Corp ruins. Towards the end of the story, our guide, who has been with us the entire time, Yuri, dies, and her head is transplanted into the body of a golden apple. We battle against the abnormality, but in the end, we are unable to kill her. N-Corp takes this opportunity to reveal themselves and steal the golden bow that is right in front of us. In the end, we return to the bus, empty-handed. Virgil scolds us, but he also senses that the party has grown a little closer together. And that marks the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 1 serves as a good introduction to the world of Limbus Company, setting the tone for the rest of the chapters onward. So while the first chapter is not everybody's favorite, I quite like it for what it does. The first chapter introduces the audience to some nihilistic concepts regarding free will and self-overcoming. Chapter 1 also introduces the basic themes that carry on throughout the rest of the story, such as who do we choose to be, what do we live for, and how do we achieve self-realization. And just for clarity, since both the Metamorphosis and Limbus Company main characters have the same name, I'm going to refer to Kafka's Gregor as Samsa and Limbus Company's Gregor as Gregor. The tragedies of Gregor and Samsa reflect Nietzsche's critique of passive nihilism, a surrender to meaningless. So without going too in-depth into philosophy, passive nihilism is a stance or philosophical stance that says life is meaningless, there is no purpose to living, and there is no reason to live. Why live when there is no point? So I'm just going to give up. I'm going to give up and not do anything and be living in despair for the rest of my entire life. Active nihilism response to passive nihilism, or the despair that it feels, can be summed up as this, and this is my own interpretation, of course, is this. Yes, life is meaningless, and there is no objective purpose to live. But I'm going to live my best. I will create my own values then. I will create my own purpose and my own points. I will embrace the absurdity of life, and I'm going to overcome despair through willpower. Both stances are technically right in that there is no, in the context of Nietzsche, in nihilism, both stances are right, that there is no point to anything. But that's not the point. It's the reaction to despair that matters. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is what drives life and evolves passivism or inaction into ambition, self-overcoming. Anyways, going back to the Metamorphosis, to summarize the short story, Samsa was a salesman who sacrificed everything for his family. He worked terrible hours. He suffered through this bad commute. I don't want to swear. Terrible commute. And then he has this bad dream. And then one day he wakes up from this nightmare to find himself unable to work or communicate. He's late for work, and he's now a cockroach. And that's not ideal. Not ideal for him, not ideal for his family, or for his future. Eventually, his family treats him terribly. They start, abusing him. His father is the worst one of all. His father is hurting Samsa, and Samsa is unable to do anything but treat his family with compassion. He is in all the story, he is kind. He is trying to face his own humanity as a cockroach. Eventually, Samsa succumbs to his ultimate fate, death, at the hands of his father. His father kind of kills Samsa, and you know what? The story ends with his family moving on and having more prosperous future than they ever did with Gregor, Samsa. So it's kind of depressing. It's also important to understand some of the context and why Samsa's family thought Gregor as a pest in such a way. Two things. This short story was published in 1915. The First World War began in 1914, around that time. So tensions were very high, things were not going well for a lot of people at the time, and that's kind of an understatement, as things were really not going well. And then for Kafka did not have a good relationship with his father. His father was not kind to him. Let's just put it there. So we might be able to see some relations to Gregor at this point already. The Smoke War was a war that involved multiple corporations. A really big war. Almost like a world war. Anyways. And Gregor has a terrible relationship with his mom, Herman. I guess you could call Herman his mom, because she kind of made him in a really messed up way. Anyways. But we know this because so Gregor was a manufactured war hero of the Smoke War. He did everything the doctors and Herman ordered him to do, but then eventually, after his desertation, he became an outcast to his former comrades. Everybody, he was beneath society. He was an animal, an insect. So like Samsa, after Gregor had undergone his metamorphosis, he had lost all control of his life. He could not live without the help of other people. It's towards the end of their stories, when they're faced with death and despair, do their stories or attitudes diverge. Samsa simply accepts his death, very contentedly. Closing his eyes, he embraces death, not as a way to escape himself, not as a way to live a better life or reincarnate or anything like that. He sees it as a way for his family to be freed of him as a burden. And it's incredibly sad and depressing that throughout the entire thing, he has viewed himself as a burden to his family. In the end, his family remarks if only he could understand them, but in the reality, if only they could understand him. So when Herman's hands begin descending from the crimson skies in that battlefield memory, Gregor faces it as a form of suicide. But for Gregor, it was more of a form of ego death instead of a physical suicide. A step in self-overcoming his own past and present, the death of his current self. So instead of dying, Gregor and the rest of the LCB team are freed from that nightmare. The end of both stories allude to this idea of Amor Fati, the love of fate. And Amor Fati can kind of boil down to this idea that not everything happens for a reason, but essentially it's this radical acceptance that everything, good or bad, that happens to you can be a point of growth, can be a point of improvement, something that you can live past and be better from, hopefully. So, in even more layman's terms, it's like if you've ever heard someone go through the worst thing in their life, and then they say, well, it is what it is. Though that would be described more of as acceptance, for it to be love, which is the amor part of Fati. It's, if they said it is what it is, and I'm glad that it happened because now I can grow from that experience, and that is love. Anyways, going back to the two stories, Samsa, at the very least, saw his death as necessary for his family to grow or prosper, discarding him being the burden they had to carry. Gregor saw Herman's hand as liberation from the nightmare he had to live. Whereas Samsa resigns himself to a cruel end, Gregor is trying to face his fate in the hopes that there will be a new tomorrow, that in facing his fate, things will be better. We can move on. So at this point in the story, he's finally stopped running away from his past. He's finally stopped running away from his fate and what he is. Still not totally Amor Fati, but it is close to it. It's a bit more of the acceptance side of things. Chapter 1, The Outsider, is, in my opinion, a good adaptation of the Metamorphosis. It showcases all the themes present, but in a little bit more of a digestible and straightforward way than the original book does, since it's less surrealistic, in my opinion. Kafka's original novel or short story is a more depressing tragedy than Limbus Company's one. It also reflects more of Kafka's own troubling familial relationships, whereas Limbus Company Chapter 1 offers a different perspective or alternative ending to the ideas presented in the Metamorphosis, this idea of the acceptance of fate and the will to power. So while I think the future chapters of Limbus Company have way better writing and better stories overall, I still really like Chapter 1 as the introduction to the world of Limbus Company. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Thanks for watching this video. And if you didn't watch the video, thank you for clicking on this video. If you didn't click on this video, wow, I don't really know how you got here, but thanks. Thanks for somehow getting here without clicking on this video. If you couldn't tell, half of this video was just unscripted, kind of rambling mess. And the first half was kind of scripted, mostly scripted. I'm trying to figure out what feels more comfortable for me to do and what is more easy on a listener, because I tend to ramble and I tend to go on these weird tangents, but I did control myself for the last half. I did not go on any weird, crazy tangents, but it might have been not as clear or concise as I'd like it to be. If you have any suggestions or thoughts or opinions or anything like that on this video, please put them in the comments. Tell me what I did wrong. I want to improve. I want to figure out how do I do better. I'm trying to learn how to edit videos, and something's weird with my audio where things kind of feel not as good, but I can't really tell what is good or bad of this audio, and part of it could just be with my voice. I don't know. Just let me know. And, I wouldn't mind a compliment here and there. Yeah, feel free to express your opinions. I don't care. I just hope that you have a good day, good evening, and a good night. Thank you and bye-bye.